Well, for those of you that were here last Sunday at the 10:30 Mass, or those watching the 10:30 Mass, you might recall that Father Joe shared a little story about how from time to time he will look at me just before we begin the procession into Mass and ask me a very simple question. He'll ask me to summarize my homily in 1 or 2 sentences. First time he did that was probably pretty close to 6 years ago, and I froze. I couldn't for the life of me figure out why, just before Mass, Father Joe was asking me this question. I was reasonably sure it wasn't because he wanted to know. So what was it? And over time, I've come to realize that he was teaching me a lesson. He was mentoring me, if you will. He was teaching me the importance of being able to summarize my homily in 1 or 2 sentences so that I could be sure I stayed focused.
That's right.
He really is a good mentor. He just scares me sometimes when he does it. So today I thought I would start with my summary. Today's readings in Psalm and Gospel, we learn about 3 things. We learn about death, faith, and miracles. And we learn how they work together to help us learn about love, and as we grow in our relationship with God and with Jesus. And I thought, that's not too bad. I can leave this homily here. But then I realized you'd be all sitting there thinking, Andy's lost his mind, because he said that, but he didn't explain it. But again, the summary helps me to stay focused on what I took from the readings and the Gospel and from the Psalm. It helps me to understand how death, faith, and miracles have helped me and hopefully will help you to grow, to understand love, and to grow in your relationship with God and with Jesus. So as we take a look at today's readings and Psalm, we ask the question, how? Well, let's start with death. And I can only tell you from my own perspective, but death has always been, for me, a challenge. I've never really understood it. My first experience of death was when I was 7 years old, and my grandmother passed away. All I knew about death at that time was that it hurt, and it hurt very deeply. And being 7 and not having had the opportunity to learn much at that point, I remember very clearly thinking to myself, oh God, let me be next so I don't have to experience this ever again. I was afraid. Death was something that I simply couldn't wrap my arms around. And so I wondered why God let it happen. It was painful. It left me afraid. It made me wonder what happens next. I guess at the end of the day, death made me question my relationship with God. But today, in the very first reading, actually the first line of the first reading from Wisdom, we hear that God did not make death, nor does he rejoice in the destruction of the living. And as you go on in the reading, you come to realize that Satan brought death into our world. He brought death into our world to divide us and to separate us from God. The second thing we hear in today's readings is about faith. You know, the definition of faith is to trust in something without tangible proof. A difficult concept, but I think something we've all experienced at one level or another, even if it's something as simple as having faith that when we step on the brake in our car, the car will stop, or at the very least slow down. I know I don't, and I doubt many of us do, really understand how that works, We just trust and we have faith that it will work. But that's not the faith that we hear about in today's readings. The faith that we hear about today is complete faith and trust in God, who we have no proof exists, but we believe anyway. In the psalm today, we heard, "I will praise you, Lord, for you have rescued me." And in the verses of the psalm, we heard that God has pity on us and rescues us from our enemies, that God changes our mourning into dancing. And we really do believe this without any hope of really clearly understanding how God will do that. We just believe that he will. And then there are the miracles, those events that we experience in life that we simply can't explain or have explained to us. Events like the story in today's gospel passage from Mark. The story of a 12-year-old girl, a child, who has died. According to everyone that was around her, she was in fact dead. But her father has faith. Her father turns to Jesus and asks for his help. And she lived. There was no doctor. There was no medicine. Just the faith of the father that Jesus could do what was being asked of him. And this story, like many of the stories in Mark's gospel, are designed to make us think, to make us go deeper, if you will, into the story, to learn and to be changed by it. So today I'm going to ask you to take a step back and think about everything that we've heard. Take a minute to ask yourself, what can we learn about this? How can we grow? Not so much by having faith or death or miracles explained to us, but how can we grow by learning more about these things, by going deeper into the stories? How can we learn and grow? By experiencing death, faith, and miracles through the stories that Jesus gave us, that the Gospels give us, that the Old Testament readings give us. Because it is through understanding of those stories and spending some time and thinking about them, we learn about love. We learn about the love that Jesus showed us. We learn about the love that he taught us to share with one another. And for me, this all came together fairly recently when my mom passed away in April. I will be the first to admit, until then, I struggled greatly with death. I guess I was struggling greatly with death because my faith was weak. Those who died, I didn't know that those who died were still with us, still praying for us, still there when we needed to talk to them. I probably talk more to Mom now than I did before. I'm not sure I had faith in eternal life. And I guess at the end, really what that means is I didn't necessarily believe in miracles. But through the experience of my mother's death and how my relationship with God has grown over the years, I have really come to understand that death is not an end. I've learned that through faith, God and Jesus, even though we can't see them or touch them, are right here with me, especially in difficult times. And as my understanding of death has grown and developed, and my faith in God and Jesus and the fact that they walk with me, miracles really do happen. For me, it was the miracle of peace, comfort. It was the miracle of knowing a God of love who can give me inner peace, when all around me seems to be falling apart. And as we learn about love, it's only natural that our relationships with God, with Jesus, and with one another, and that includes people we don't necessarily know well, or some people we may know well and don't necessarily like, but those relationships will grow, and we'll learn to forgive. So as you leave here today, and as we continue to hear the stories from the Gospel of Mark throughout the rest of this year, ask yourself what can be learned each time. What's the story trying to tell you? I promise you this, there's always a message there for each and every one of us, and although that message may not be the same message for each and every one of us, that message will always help us grow in our relationships with God, with Jesus, and with one another.